Hi, everyone. We have a good friend of mine here, Bradley Logan, um, that we want to talk about something very different today, um, which it's called uh, marriage trust. But so, what I really appreciate about Bradley is Bradley, you're just one of the few people that you're really committed to living life fully and just trusting in that life will provide and take care of you. Like you're really committed to listening to life and going with the flow of life, and life takes care of you in this beautiful way. You're like a true inspiration for me of how you live your life. And not only that, but you're devoted your life to supporting people how to do the same, like, and not just as an idea, but to set up their whole life with this whole ideas of trust, and live every part of their life kind of surrendering to nature and higher power and to the creator. So yeah, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you. I like to think of the journey I've been on as a licensed attorney, which is kind of my background, was in darkness. In other words, I didn't know what I was doing and what I was up to when I helped people form agreements, contracts. I was in the commercial real estate realm and did a lot of real estate deals and would help people set up LLCs and entities, organizations. And then I moved into working with wealthy individuals in their financial planning, asset protection, if you will. That's kind of where I got into the statutory trust realm. And I use that word statutory as a distinction between the type of trust that I do now, which would be in the private realm. So we don't need lawyers like we think we do to do the things that we want to do. I mean, that's the training, the programming, the conditioning that we're under, right? Like we want to go do almost anything in commerce, and we think we need some type of legal agreement. And I used to be the person who would help people create those, and I thought that was, the highest vibration. What I was helping people do was operate in a way that was the most protective. And then what I learned and realized was that that's just not the case. That these man-made laws, rules, and regulations actually keep us bound into a system that is narrow in scope as it relates to the ability for someone to act from their divine capacity or in what I call divine jurisdiction. And I believe that that's kind of what takes this concept that you wanted to talk to me about today, the marriage trust. And it takes the most sacred relationship that I believe people can enter into in this go round on the planet to the way that it currently operates. And it puts it in the hands of the government. It's a patented process. That license is a patent.
Yeah, it's a marriage license.
Yeah. And all licenses, as a kind of a contextual backdrop for this conversation, in my opinion, are the opposite of what we think they are. We think that we go get a license to become, to gain access into this knowledge of whatever it is that we're getting the license for, right? Like if we take the driver's license, like you go get a driver's license. Now you're legally okay to drive, right? But what is that? I mean, and let's use that example, right? Like to explain how crazy the concept is, right? I mean, like when you're 16, you go take a paper test, you get your license. Do you really know how to drive? Right? I mean, if you study for the test, you can get your license, and I mean, I guess they take you out in the car for 5 or 10 minutes, and you drive around, and you see if you can parallel park or whatever the case is, right? But you really have no concept of how to avoid danger or what to do, and treacherous situations or get on the highway and go somewhere. I mean, you have to practice. You gotta actually learn how to drive. The license itself does not verify that you know how to do that. And it's the same thing with a doctor, with the doctors who get a license, right? Does that mean that they actually know how to heal people? It just means that they passed a test and that they've followed a protocol for educating themselves. And it took me the longest to see that as it relates to my own license, a bar license, meaning that I felt like, oh no, I went to school for a long time. I've been studying, I've been practicing. I'm authorized to practice law now, but you don't really know anything about the practice of law when you pass the bar and you get that piece of paper that says you can go practice law. It's not until you've done these things that you actually have the experience and the knowledge, and you really didn't need the license or the permission from some board in order to become a true healer in the doctor's case, right? And there's so many people. In fact, now I see a doctor's license, the practice of medicine, as we call it,
as less qualified.
As less qualified, because they're going to have to run a program, which is granted to them by the American Medical Association. And that association will not even allow them to talk about things that I would want to do for my own healthcare. Like, for instance, herbs and plants, right? Like, doctors aren't allowed to talk about that, or they can get sued, because that's not part of the protocol for what they describe as legitimate modalities for healing. If you have cancer, they have a system that you have to go into in order to be healed of that. And it's poisonous, in my opinion, the chemo and the radiation that they want to put into your body to heal cancer, instead of talking about your diet, instead of talking about, consuming less sugar and those types of things.
And not only that, but if you want to try out an alternative method to healing, the insurance won't cover it, right? So then you're tied. So the doctor works for the insurance or for you, right?
By the way, is another licensed industry, right? Insurance. That's all regulated. Banking, accounting. I mean, you can give me any license. I ask this question to people.
I have a license. I'm a contractor.
Okay,
I have a contractor license.
Yeah. And I bet there's a lot of limitations you find by having that license in ways that you would like to be able to approach building something. And you're like, when the inspector comes, I can't have done it this way.
Yeah, constantly.
That's the example. That's another great example, right?
Yeah.
And so back to the marriage license.
Well, before that, so, you use the word private. So what can you break down the difference between what do you mean by private and public?
Sure. Yeah. So I think of, I'll use the word jurisdiction as it relates to what we are governed by. Okay. So the jurisdiction is kind of what is ruling over us. In the public realm, the jurisdiction is the government and man-made laws, rules, and regulations. In the private realm, we just do away with all the man-made laws, rules, and regulations, and I say we're operating in divine jurisdiction, under God's law, under nature's law, which is just basically like, let's say, common sense to a certain degree, but not everyone's sense is the same. So it's kind of like natural consequences, right?
Yeah.
And you can't harm another person. And you have to do things with an intention that is beneficial to nature. And then you're free to do whatever you want in the private jurisdiction, or in this jurisdiction that I'm talking about, under divine law, right? And so I struggled with the word private for a while, because I was involved in a conversation with a group of people, and they're like, well, private, that sounds elitist, and that sounds like, like it's not for everybody. And what I settled on, right, is there's a difference between private and secret, right? So,
or exclusive.
That's correct, right? So like, I think of like a secret is something that you are keeping from others. Private, and you're keeping it because it benefits you, right? Where private is, I'm keeping something so that you're not harmed, right? It's not a secret. I mean, I'll tell people about it all day long. I mean, but I don't just run around and tell everybody, because some people, if they start to come into this world of operating in private and they don't know what they're doing, can get themselves in trouble, right? There needs to be an education and a background and understanding about your own divine, you got to go in, and from that place, you kind of step through into the public realm and operate from your private space, right? My private space is in my vessel. It's inside me.
Yeah.
So is that kind of help answer the question about the difference between why we call it private is because it's outside of the public realm, which is man-made laws, rules, and regulations. It's in the private realm.
Yeah. Okay. So from there, if we're going to talk about, before that, so when it comes to trust, what is a trust? I mean, first of all, that word, I like the word a lot. I think everyone likes the word trust. But what is a trust the way you define it?
Yeah. So basically, all of the documentation that I help people create, right, which is I was going to say it's a mirror of the public, but it's actually the other way around. The public has mirrored these private agreements that people would enter into, meaning like back before we had statutes, man-made rules and laws and regulations written in the books, the millions that we now have to supposedly conform to, people would just enter into agreements with each other, right? You're in the Garden of Eden, you're running around, and you go to your neighbor, your friend, your brother, or whatever, and you make an agreement between each other. That was a trust. That's a trust agreement. Like,
so
you're going to do this. I said I'll do this. We trust each other. And then attorneys come along and they try and, because people aren't necessarily trustworthy, or not all the people are trustworthy, or you're thinking you want to go into an agreement with somebody who you might not fully trust, so you want to write it down and lock it in and have it agreed to. All kind of agreements, in my opinion, are some form of a trust agreement. The Declaration of Independence, one of the greatest agreements ever written, that's a trust document, right? So It's written between men, it's written between people, and it has a group, which are all the people in the United States, that are the beneficiaries of that agreement. That's a trust agreement. So a trust agreement has parties that enter into an agreement in trust. They might use different language and different words depending upon the type of agreement that is written, but basically they're all similar in nature. And then there's somebody who receives a benefit from that agreement. And so a trust agreement has parties that are doing something for the benefit of another.
I like that. So it's not just that it benefits the agreeing people, but also benefiting someone else.
Correct.
Or something else.
Yeah. So like Earth Trust is a document that I work with a lot, right? Not to be confused with a statutory trust, or the one that, where people want to pass along their supposed things that they own. I don't have it that anyone really owns anything. You just have the right to steward things for a period of time, right? And so you're stewarding them for who? For the next generation. Well, that's a trust.
Yeah. Nice.
And so this idea of a marriage trust, as opposed to a license to get married. I mean, why do you need a license?
Sounds so different. Marriage license, marriage trust, right? Because a trust is an important part of a marriage.
It's critical. Yeah, the foundation.
Well, since we're breaking down all the words, let's and I want to say a couple words about this. But so, what is marriage? So many people get married without knowing why they're getting married. They don't sit and have a conversation about marriage. And I really like how you said that the marriage is the most sacred union, the
relationship.
most
Yeah.
sacred relationship you can get to. And I've been thinking about this a lot because it's such a unique relationship. It's the only relationship where you choose to come together with somebody to weave your lives as one. Like now, two lives become one. And there is another relationship like that, even with your children or your parents. They're, in a sense, you're raising them so they can go have their own life, right? But with partner, you're creating life as one. And most people don't even think about it now or talk about it. They're like, oh, well, I guess we've been dating long enough. I guess it's time to propose, or she got pregnant, or the parents are giving us hard time, or so many random reasons. And people don't take the idea of, wow, you're entering a sacred agreement. And when you go get your license, no one talks to you about that either, right? But with a marriage trust, you're almost forced, you have to have these conversations, right?
Which is, in my opinion, is pretty critical. I mean, it's the type of thing you should be considering before you're going to enter into such a sacred arrangement or agreement with another, right?
Yeah.
And not with the state. I mean, why do we involve the government in this sacred relationship? That's the part that I think the reason we do it is because we've been trained that that's, well, oh, and there's that tax benefit that we get, right? I think that's one of the reasons why that exists, is so that people will go get that license and keep themselves plugged in. Well, they don't realize, a lot of people don't realize they're doing this, but that's keeping individuals plugged into the matrix system, and it keeps them accountable into the government. And now you get a benefit from the government for being married, which is that you can file jointly and you save a few $1,000 on your tax return. That's a really bad reason to involve the government in your relationship, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think that's often the reason why. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just get together with your partner and make an agreement on how you want this relationship to go? I mean, why do we feel like we got to go to the government and get their blessing on it?
Yeah, very good question. Why? Most people don't even stop to ask that question, right?
And I think innately it's because, well, we're going to continue to file. We're going to start filing our tax returns together, and we get a benefit if we're married.
Yeah.
And so that's why. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is. It'd be a great poll from my perspective.
I've heard couples who was like, oh, we got married on December 30th because we looked at our taxes, and then just the two of them went down to City Hall. They didn't even have a wedding. They were like living together for 5 years, and like, oh wow, our taxes will be so much better. So they go literally on December 30th, the last day possible, to sign the license to get the benefit.
Let me maybe point out some of the pitfalls I believe exist with that license, right? Which is that it now puts the children, the offspring, the beneficiaries of that relationship under the control of the government, not the parents. So now if something goes wrong with that relationship and the parties want to split, which typically, is not that's a painful process, as anyone who's been through a divorce would know. And you don't see things the same way that you did when you came together. And so there's tension and frustration. And what do people do? They go hire an attorney, a licensed bar member who has a set of rules that they play by, that are sanctioned by the government, by the state, on what's going to happen with the kids. And the parents can no longer decide. It's a travesty. And the attorneys are the ones who benefit by the friction. So you go hire somebody to supposedly help you out. It's not like I know there's horror stories about, and I've been through 2 divorces myself, unfortunately. So, I have my own firsthand experience about what that looks like. And I don't think people necessarily intentionally go hire their attorney to beat the other person up. Sometimes yes. And I'm sure there's plenty of those examples. But even if you want a peaceful separation or split, once you bring that attorney into the mix, they have a set of rules that they have to play by as it relates to how this separation is going to go. And it becomes an adversarial process. No matter what that attorney tells you about how they're going to work, they're going to try and keep it amicable and friendly. The system, the way that it's set up and the way that they run that program underneath the license makes it adversarial. And it also makes it so that the children have a set of rules that the state requires the parents to follow if the children are minors.
Yeah.
And the attorneys aren't like necessarily telling their clients all this stuff. In fact, it's running in the subconscious mind because of their training that they don't even necessarily get all these things. Right. And so it's just plugging in. When you get that license, you're plugging in. And most people don't know this, into a system that's going to arbitrate or tell you how things are going to go when you want to separate, or if something goes wrong in this relationship and you choose to separate. And it's adversarial. It's a nightmare. And the attorneys are extracting. By the way, I forgot to bring that up at the beginning of the call when we were talking about licenses. License by its nature is an extraction, not an addition to. I mean, they make it sound like, or they make you think that it's an addition to something, right? Like if you go to your licensed professional, you're getting all this wise wisdom and benefit. But and guess what? You pay for that every single time, right? I mean, he's got a license. You're paying more. You pay more for the for the licensed contractor than you could somebody who doesn't have a license, even though they might be highly more qualified to build the structure that you want.
I tell people, if sometimes some people will call me for a small job, and I'm like, you don't need a licensed contractor for this, because
and it's going to cost you money.
I have to pay workers' comp, I have to pay insurances, I have to pay bonds, I have to pay employees' taxes. To make any amount, just to make a profit, I have to charge double what I'm paying my employees.
Yeah. The licenses come with overhead.
Yeah.
The marriage license included.
Yeah. So what would be the process? How does I just want to share, like, I've gone through this process with you around, we were setting up a trust, and just reading that paper, reading those agreements, and talking about the beneficiaries, and talking about just going through that piece of paper was like going through a workshop. It was an intense, powerful experience that it was very profound, just going through that paper. So if a couple has to go through these questions and to fill all signing this trust, that alone can take their relationship to a whole new level they didn't even know was possible. So do you want to share a little bit more about what the process is, or what would that look like? Or
Sure, yeah. So it's really a template of an agreement in order to get people to start thinking about the things that are going to come up when they're wildly in love with each other and things are going well and they're thinking about bringing this union together, right? And then you can address, and it makes sense. It's not like I used to struggle a little bit with, why, like a prenuptial agreement, why would like that's like you're setting yourself up for failure. You're putting energy towards it not working out. Like, I don't want to deal with that, right? And it's like, well, that's one way to look at it, I suppose. Yeah. But another way to look at it is life changes. Like, things occur that we can't possibly foresee and tell in the future. And to have taken the time when things are going well to at least address how you would want things to go if it doesn't stay this way forever makes sense to me. And I would think, and by the way, if you don't do that, then guess who gets to decide how it's going to go?
The license. The license.
And then when you go hire the licensed professional, the attorney, they start dictating. And people aren't, you're emotional when you're going through a divorce. You're not thinking clearly about the whole thing. And you just listen to the professional. And the professional is making money by you listening to their strategies and their concepts. And they're telling you about laws that you supposedly, most people don't know about. You don't know that your child is going to be a ward of the state when you got what? Their birth certificate, another form of license. A registration. Registrations and licenses, same thing. Or energetically, they're the same thing, right? So we as people with our social security numbers are registered into the system. The birth certificate registers us into the system. That marriage license now takes the two of those, ties them together. And if you look closely at a birth certificate in the United States, you'll see that the child is a ward of the state. The mom's maiden name is used, which makes the child a bastard, not taking the name of the father. Ultimately, the child gets the name of the father put on the certificate. But when you read the birth certificate and you see how they put all the pieces of the puzzle together, it's actually making the child, that minor child, a ward of the state. And the state the government opens up an estate for us as individuals, and they manage our funds. And we don't know it. They're managing our funds in a trust. That's a whole nother conversation for a different podcast. But I mean, that's what's going on. I mean, whether people want to believe that or not, you can check it out. Anyone can see that, find these things out pretty easily online. I mean, just Google it. And so the marriage license continues to create that separation, and it makes the children of the people in the marriage, it further bonds them to the state's care, so that's how they have jurisdiction over when the parents separate or split. One parent can't just say, if the other parent opposes, I'm going to have all of the rights to raise this child, right? Like, or the child's better off with one parent than the other. I mean, and if you start disputing over that, the attorneys make a bunch of money. The parents are just fighting, and it never works out well for either, especially for the child. Now, you can enter into a private agreement, which was what you would do in one of these a marriage trust, that would speak to these things. And you can, when you're in love and when you're thinking clearly and at your highest vibrational capacity, you can make a decision. If this doesn't work out the way that we feel like it's going to work out now, this is how we want things to go. And you
have an adult conversation.
You have an adult conversation in trust between two people who decide, right? And that's where the trust comes in. Now you're going to trust that that's going to be the way that things go. And if you get the marriage license, that blows that up.
Yeah.
Because now you got to play by statutory rules and laws. And that now, if one of the adults decides that they don't like what they agreed to, you're shit out of luck, because they're going to be able to refer to the man-made laws as opposed to the laws or the agreements that the two people made when they were of sound mind and when things were going well, right?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the marriage trust.
Yeah. And how do you trust the beneficiary, right? Like, let's say I don't want to have children. Like we're clear, or we're too old, or whatever, we're, getting at an age where we can't have children, or we already had children with previous marriages, but, and some people just don't want to have children. So that's the obvious, you say this marriage, trust, and the beneficiary of that is our children. But if you don't have a children, how would you address that?
Well, the two individuals are still going to benefit from the agreement, right? So you're each beneficiary. The two people coming together are going to benefit from this agreement as well. So you could consider them beneficiaries.
Okay.
And then you're going to make a decision on how things are going to be separated, or, what assets that the combined union of the two people brought together because right, that's what people end up fighting over when the separation occurs.
Yeah.
And of course, there's recipes for that in statutory law, and they'll run an analysis and they'll run a little chart, and they, depending upon the laws in the state that you got your marriage license, that's how things get separated. But there might be all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't want that to be the way things get separated, especially when you're harmonious and in love. And if somebody breaks that agreement, they break that trust, then their rights should not be the same as if for the other person who honored the trust agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I mean, who is going to disagree with that when you're getting along? The time when people don't want to agree with that is when they broke trust, they broke their word, they broke their commitment. And then they're like, wait a second, I want things to be different. And then they go hire an attorney, and the attorney says, oh yeah, no, we can make them different.
Yeah.
And then that's where the fighting starts.
I have a friend of mine that hasn't seen his children for 2 years because that he's going through a divorce, and that's how the state has decided, and he's have to fight this, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of the beneficiary other than yourself, because it asks the question of why getting married, why you come together, why have a relationship in the first place, what is this relationship for? Like in my eyes, at least, you could be we're coming together to be better than to be of benefit to something higher than us, right? Something bigger than us. You could be stewards to a piece of land, or so you can make the beneficiary. I would even assume you can make it even like a spiritual concept. We're to the benefits of the higher good, or the divine, or God, or whatever.
Whatever you choose, whatever the two people that come together decide, and what a great time to decide, right?
Yeah, what a great time to decide, and what a great conversation to have. Because, again, most people, you ask them, "Why'd you get married?" They're like, "Oh, well, because that's what you do."
Yeah, that's the American dream. That's the process. Yeah, right.
Yeah, most people
bad reason to get married.
Don't have a good answer. This makes me think, isn't there places or states where if you live with someone for 5 years, they automatically make you domestic partners or something? Like common law marriage. Yeah.
That's called? Yeah.
Yeah. How does?
And I don't. It may be 5. It may be different jurisdiction. I mean, depending upon the jurisdiction or the state. I think, like in California, it's 2. I thought it was 2 years.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but there is such thing. Yeah.
Now in Arizona, which is where my marriages were, where I got the license, that was not the case. And then I was held captive to pay money to my ex-spouse for years in a non-modifiable divorce decree, which was crazy. I mean, she was basically living with somebody else. Got remarried, but she didn't get the license, which wouldn't let me off the hook from having to pay the alimony support for years. It was, it was I mean, she used this other guy's last name. They were doing fantastically financially, flying around the globe in a private plane, and I'm forking over. I mean, because she didn't get the license. Yeah, I'm forking over all kinds of money, right? So I mean, again, that's not equitable. That's not right. It's not justifiable, and from the way I see it, and the law should be changed. But that's just not where I put my energy. I'm
trying to change
stepping
the law
out of all law, because I don't operate in that system. I don't subscribe to man-made laws, rules, and regulations. I operate in the private.
Yeah. Right? In the divine jurisdiction.
That's right.
So, I'm super excited and super powerful. So how, let's say a couple wants to do this. Let's say I want to do this. Or you mentioned that you've been working with someone that is getting divorced two
They're
kids.
annulling their marriage, yeah, so that they can enter into a trust agreement. That's right.
Yeah. So what would the process be like?
Yeah, so we just have an interview. I've got a questionnaire that I would send out to a couple to get them thinking about this process and thinking about the things that need to be considered. And then I prepare a template, a draft of an agreement that's got their answers put into it. And then that goes back to them. And then you have like an hour and a half long conversation, just kind of after they've read every single word of a trust agreement that they ultimately will sign. And then we go through and make sure that it matches up with their spirit, their intention, and has language, if you have certain trigger words that they don't like that come from the document that I originally used, we get rid of them all and we make it so that it feels right for them. I think of it as like a living spiritual document for this living spiritual relationship that's the most sacred one can enter into. And then once it feels comfortable and it resonates fully with the individuals, they can then set it up in such a way where if they want to have a sacred ceremony, highly recommended. I don't know about a big old fancy wedding. I mean, I think my opinion would be I would tell people to take those resources that would go into that and, maybe use them towards the beneficiary or the common purpose of the wedding. But I mean, it's for each person to decide how they want to.
Each their own, yeah.
Yeah.
To me, this feels like needs to be a workshop. I don't know if this is just how my mind thinks, but in a workshop where we go through these questions and guide people through this process, because
highly recommended.
It's pretty intense. Even just like, who is the beneficiary? What happens if this dissolves? How do we do this? These are big, uncomfortable conversations that should be guided through people that, like yourself, that has guided other people through the process. Because I assume this would sound very exciting and novel and all that to many couples, but it's such a different way of thinking that it's like a paradigm shift that people are going to need some hell holding, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the time is right. I mean, in what's going on in the world these days, right? Like people are realizing that the government and their processes and these licenses and these agents that are watching everything we do are not the right. That's the old paradigm, right? Yeah. People need to take responsibility for themselves and stop paying somebody with a license that's programmed, limited in their ability to talk about the area of expertise that they want to seek, and actually start to, a workshop where they can explore these things themselves and not just be depending upon somebody else's knowledge. Like start to digest it for yourself and own it for yourself. So beneficial in the process.
I love that you said the word responsibility. You take responsibility for yourself, for your choices, and for your marriage, right? Like you're responsible for it. You get to set it up the way you want to set it up. You get to have those conversations. You get to dissolve it the way you choose to dissolve it. Like it just really puts you in the driver's seat of your relationship, your marriage, and from that place, I think has a lot bigger chances of this relationship thriving and succeeding than from like, I don't know what are we doing. I don't know when we got married. I don't know what we do if we get divorced. Or what's the
radical self-responsibility. Yeah.
Radical self-responsibility. Maybe that should be the name of the workshop. From self-responsibility to divine marriage.
There you go.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Well, so you're going to set one. It sounds like you're about to set one up. That's what I'm hearing.
I mean, yeah, and then we can come do it in Costa Rica.
That would be fantastic. That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then you
because
could
you're
have,
gonna.
uh, uh, I was going to say a honeymoon. I don't know. We got to come up with a new word for that, right? When you enter into a marriage trust, afterwards you have some type of party, or a ceremony of
Ceremony,
celebration. Yeah. Yeah. Here's a great place to do it. That's right.
yeah. So we'll get people married in paradise.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay.
It's a beautiful place for all of those things, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we managed to cover a lot in a short period of time. That's impressive.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen usually. Anything else you want to share, or you think this is a good place we can?
Yeah, I think again, just anyone who's considering this, I just would encourage them, like to really take a look at not having your sacred relationship tied to the government. I mean, there's just no, I cannot figure a benefit where that makes sense. Now, I can tell you some of the strategies I've seen people using to get residency in other countries.
Without.
Well, no, I'm saying that's like some of the reasons why I'm finding people get married.
Oh yeah,
so that they can
yeah.
get residency in other countries, right? But there's tentacles that come with that. I mean, if the strategy is not about the marriage at all and it's just about the residency and the rights to travel, I mean, I guess I think of all these things. I mean, you've heard me say this before, history. I think of this chess strategy, right? Like in the game of life, the way I view it is we're just playing a big game.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm playing the game of operating in divine jurisdiction, which is just directly under spirit or nature's laws. And so this idea of using a marriage license to get the permission to travel across borders, to me, I can see that that's a strategy available and it could make some sense, but that's not standing in your divine jurisdiction. That's not standing under divine jurisdiction. That's like stepping back into the matrix and making tentacles that have repercussions that I don't think people think about when they do that. Because you still got to go through a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience has been, because I've seen people do this, that person that they married, who they were friends with when they got married, and it wasn't a romantic situation or that type of thing. They did this for the strategy of getting Costa Rica, like for instance, down here in Costa Rica, to get residency in Costa Rica so that they don't have to deal with United States things. And so I can see the validity of that particular strategy. But now all of a sudden you've got this local Costa Rican who's been rethinking some of these things about, maybe making it a little bit more difficult for that divorce to happen. Or they want a little bit more money than was originally thought through in the beginning. And you're stuck. The person who entered into that agreement, because of the license, they're stuck, right? So again, something to throw out and consider, that when you're operating in the divine jurisdiction, like I don't think you need to play the game that way of utilizing licenses. It's just that's not divine.
But it takes a certain amount of trust, right? To really trust that divine jurisdiction, right? Because people don't understand that concept and don't trust that concept. And it's like, whoa, we're so brainwashed to think that the government's there for us and it's taking care of us and the government has your back and all that. And in reality, if you trust in the divine, it will take much better care of you than the government would, right?
Thank you. And all of the governmental programs are volunteer. That's not what we're taught. So many of them seem like they're a requirement. Like, in order to get married, you got to go get the license. No, you don't. Why do you need to do that? Like in order to operate a business, you got to go get a business license, or you got to form a corporation or an LLC. No, you don't. That's the program that the licensed professionals, accountants, CPAs, you go to your licensed professional to get advice, and that's what they tell you. So we just accept it. There's no radical self-responsibility there. If you were radical self-responsible, you'd be like, well, why? Why? Who says I got to do it that way?
Exactly.
That's not the way it has to be done.
And it was, it's in all area of life, like, with health too, right? Like, that's one of the biggest places where, like, well, my doctor said, what the insurance said, like, well, what about what your body said? What do you need? Like,
that's right.
And people don't, just a weird concept, listen to your body instead of your doctor.
We've been trained to listen to the licensed professional. That's bottom line. Oh, but they went to school for years to learn what they learned. How am I'm over here and not really paying that much attention. I'm going to go to someone who's been studying it. Well, what people have, I think more and more people are waking up to this. They've studied a program, and the program is magnifying the program. It's not really about healthcare.
Yeah.
It's not about healthcare. That's the medical program. And like, let's just use the CPA license, and then we can close with this one. But I love this one. Why would people go to why do you go to CPA, right? Well, for financial, I want to know how to protect my assets, keep as many of my assets out of the matrix system as possible, right? But the first thing that the licensed CPA professional does is say, you got to file into the system. Well, that's why I'm trying to keep my assets from being, that makes no sense. And it's a voluntary program. They won't tell you that, but it is. Yeah. And I can explain it to people if they want to know, but, but anyway, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's such a prime example.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
You go to the money manager, and the first thing they do is say, register.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a vital, very, very important information that people need to know about. Like, there is another option that sets you up from the beginning for success, way better than what you're doing with these licenses. Yeah, entering, as you said, even more, like, again, you're entering into a divine relationship in this thing called marriage. So does the government, the state, have a place in that divine union? Like, ask yourself that question, right? So if you're going to look at it as divine, then enter it in a way that it's divine, whatever that means for you, right? Like, and have that conversation and make those agreements and those trust agreements in this divine way. Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Very, very juicy conversation. We need to. Okay, so I guess we're setting up a workshop now.
Let me know when it is. Yeah. That'd be a fun one. Thanks for sharing this message and helping people through this, Christine. I know it's near and dear to your heart. So appreciate what you're up to.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Anytime.
Yeah. By the way, if you want people to get a hold of you, just I'll put your website in the bottom or something, or private, share something.
PrivatelegAcyAdvisors.com, advisors with an E, is where you can find me. And the way that I operate is people become a member of my private association, so that everything that we do is inside of that container, not in commerce, not in man-made rules, laws, and regulations. And then we can have private conversation like we're having here amongst the members inside the association. So they don't come to me for my educational background or a license or any of that nonsense. I don't operate under those, although I've held several professional licenses in the past. I now just talk to people as an individual. And help educate them and take the years of understanding and studying these realms, and then I encourage the members in my association to make their own decisions, and I can guide them along the way. And I prepare documents that help, but the documents don't provide the documents are not the magic. It's an inner knowing. It's coming from the divine inside of each person, and then the document is just a tool to help them remember and kind of get them started down that path. It's an instruction manual, if you will.
Yeah.
To play the game of divine jurisdiction. But once you know how to play it, you don't keep going back to the instruction manual. You're just playing the game, right?
So good, so good. So glad you're doing this. It's so needed. Game. Yeah, so good. All right, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah,
we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Yeah,
we'll talk to you soon.